You're watching The World Now on TVC News. U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi says Democratic leaders' White House meeting on Wednesday was cut short after Republican President Donald Trump had a meltdown, in her words, over a House of Representatives vote condemning his Syria withdrawal. Well, the Democratic leader says Trump had a temper tantrum due to the number of Republicans who joined Democrats to vote for a resolution condemning his decision to withdraw U.S. forces from northeast Syria, clearing the way for Turkey's offensive against the U.S. allied Syrian Kurds. But the Republican minority leader Kevin McCarthy came out of the building later and accused Ms. Pelosi of storming out of the meeting. There was no immediate response from the White House. Let's go live now, getting the views of global affairs analyst Jonathan Wachtel. Thank you very much for joining us all the way from the U.S. Perhaps we could start now with your take on the drama that Nancy Pelosi says happened yesterday at that meeting that was built to hold with the president. It's still on this Turkey situation in Syria. What are your thoughts?
Kemi, I'm sorry, but the audio keeps on getting lost. If you could be so kind as to ask the question one more time.
Right.
Apologies.
Right. I'm asking for your thoughts now on the situation in the U.S. It appears
I'm terribly sorry. I cannot hear you.
All right. Jonathan Wachtel will try to reconnect and get better connectivity from your end. Still in the U.S., former Vice President Joe Biden has called on U.S. President Donald Trump to release his tax returns. Speaking to reporters in Columbus, Ohio on Wednesday, former Vice President Joe Biden, a leading candidate for the 2020 presidential nomination, called on U.S. President Donald Trump to release his tax returns or shut up. The former vice president also commented on rival U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts' Middle East policy.
Mr. President, you want to talk about corruption? I've released 21 years of my tax returns. I entered as one of the poorest men in Congress, left one of the poorest men in government, in Congress, and as vice president. I made no money while I was in there other than my salary. Mr. President, even Richard Nixon released his tax returns. Mr. President, release your tax returns or shut up. I quite frankly was surprised. I have never heard anyone say, with any serious background in foreign policy, that we pull all troops out of the Middle East. It's extremely, and I'm not sure exactly what she meant by it. If she meant pulling our fleet out of the, the Eastern Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf, I think it would be an absolute disaster for American security and American foreign policy.
Let's go back to our interview with affairs analyst now, Jonathan Wachtel, global affairs analyst, I meant to say. Mr. Wachtel, it's good to have you join us on TVC News. So what are your thoughts now on the division U.S. politicians have on the situation in Syria?
Yes, I mean, it is really highlighted the division amongst Republicans and Democrats, and actually Republicans who adamantly feel that the president has made a terrible decision. So we are here in essentially some deep, deep political turmoil, and all this has to be played out. As you mentioned earlier, Kemi, there was quite a scene apparently at the White House yesterday between Speaker Pelosi and the president, in which things apparently flared up to such a degree that many people were taken aback.
Absolutely. So where again do your support lies on now? Should the U.S. president have withdrawn forces from Syria at a time like this?
Clearly, if you look at the resounding vote within the House of Representatives, in which you had hundreds of both Democrats, of course Democrats, but Republicans joining Democrats to condemn the decision to withdraw U.S. forces, there is a sentiment within Washington that is largely against the president's decision. We do see that things have become far more complicated, and there have been some outcomes, results from this decision that are unpleasant and difficult. So the road ahead is really uncertain, and there needs to be some stabilization worked out. where does this go? Does Turkey listen to the president's warning and take notice that sanctions are going to start hitting? Or does President Erdogan just push forward because he feels like he has the momentum and he feels that he can accomplish what his set goal is, which is to crush the Kurdish forces in northern Syria, to ensure that he at least follows through with his political ambitions in terms of his population and what they want to see, well, what many want to see happen within Turkey. It's a very complicated situation, and it also involves the Russians, the Iranians, ISIS.
And how much do you think, or how do you imagine that the Turkish side now will go? Specifically, will they bend?
It's difficult to say. There was a standoff that happened, you may recall, I don't know whether it made news in Nigeria, it could have, that there was a priest, an American priest who had come under a lot of political pressure and even arrest within Turkey, and that created quite a stir within this country in terms of religious freedom and crackdowns by the Erdogan government, and under threats of sanctions. Eventually, the Turks released Reverend Munson, and that particular problem settled. Now, you can't really compare the two, but there is a precedent of Erdogan listening to the pressure. This time, it's a different thing because Erdogan really views the YPG Kurdish fighters as terrorists, just like there are allied PKK in northern Iraq and actually active within Turkey itself. So, it's not just about a priest this time, an American priest. This is about real geopolitical and territorial issues and longstanding centuries of conflict between the peoples in that region. So the incentive to push forward is a lot stronger, obviously. So we'll have to see if the threat of sanctions and other maneuvers may convince Erdogan to stand down. But we are dealing with a much more serious, heavier stakes situation.
Absolutely, Jonathan Wachtel, a complex situation it is. Thank you very much for your contributions on the program.